this presentation's on hypoxia, decompression sickness, and then my experiences as a high altitude instructor. So a lot of this is on military parachuting, but also where civilian skydiving is now going high as well, or higher anyway. So hopefully some of the information might help you out. Firstly though, to introduce myself, there we go. My name's Scott Beach. All right, I'm a Royal Air Force parachute jumping instructor. I have been so since 2009. I'm a multi-rated British skydiving instructor, so CSI, TI, and AFFI. I've been involved in, participated in lots of high altitude parachuting, whether that's as a parachutist or a dispatcher. And I'm also a high altitude instructor as well, okay? But then more so for my brief with this is I've been witness to or have been involved in a number of cases of hypoxia and or DCS as well. The training that I've been through in the RAF, I thought I knew everything I needed to, ended up being involved in a few cases that actually pointed out to me that I didn't really know that much at all. Didn't ever really think decompression sickness was something that was going to be part of skydiving until it was. So that led me to trying to learn more about it for my own knowledge. And then I started putting together some presentations to try and help other people, a bit more as an aid memoir. So, why is this of interest to you? Okay, hypoxia is a real possibility when we're going to altitude, all right? It's not just high altitude, all right? Big ways, go high. I'm not a big wave jumper. I've been on drop zones when big waves have been taking place. I've been at Paris doing stuff in the past, and you know, regularly some big waves that I've seen there are going from 22,000 feet, and they're doing multiple jumps per day. So there's that, but then also, all right, it's becoming a bit of a commercial business. So there are drop zones around the world now that will go as high as 40,000 feet. So if people are willing to pay the fees associated with going that high, then they can. So it's just to make people aware. I'm not trying to sell it or anything like that, okay, but it's information, isn't it? We need to be informed of the risks that we're actually putting ourselves or putting onto ourselves. So just a few things that I'll talk about. Okay, I'm not really going to go into too much depth into British skydiving max altitudes. They're all in the ops manual, but I'll talk through that because some of you may not be aware. All right, different types of altitude. I'm not going to go into too much of that, but just so you've got an understanding when I'm talking through some of the presentation, the different types of altitude that we have. Very basic human respiratory system, okay, and then obviously getting onto the meat of it, so with hypoxia and then decompression sickness. Okay, so does anyone know how long are we allowed above 10,000 feet before leaving the aircraft? Can I get an advance? 30 minutes. 30 minutes, yeah, 30 minutes, okay, 30 minutes, all right. And then, how long are we allowed above 12,000 feet? 6 minutes, yeah, 6 minutes, okay. Cool. If you want more information, there is more on it in the ops manual. But yeah, they're sort of the main things that we're talking about. And that's obviously between 12,000 feet and 15,000 feet as well, okay. So we shouldn't be doing skydiving without prior authority above that. So, really quickly, different types of altitude, okay? So first one I'll talk about is height above ground level, or AGL, okay? So we set our altimeters to 0 on the DZ. We go up, it's reading 12,000 feet. We are 12,000 feet above the ground that's directly above below us, or the drop zone that we've set that to 0, okay? You've then got above mean sea level, AMSL or MSL, all right? And that is the pressure at sea level, okay? That changes throughout the day with different weather fronts and all that sort of stuff, okay? Also known as QNH, which pilots would obviously have an understanding of. But then we have flight level and pressure altitude. So in the British Skydiving Ops Manual, it refers to flight level. Okay, potentially you'll hear pilots talking about flight level. All right, and then what that is to make sure that, for instance, a aircraft, different companies are available, okay, but an aircraft taking off from Australia or sort of Nepal or America, all right, they're going from different heights above mean sea level. So, you know, one airfield could be 3,000 feet above sea level, one could be at sea level. But by changing their, or adjusting their altimeters to, we have the international standard atmosphere of 1013 hectopascals, all right? They adjust it to that, and then that makes sure that when they take off, and the pilot that took off in Australia, his altimeter says it's at 35,000 feet. The guy who took off from Colorado is also at 35,000 feet, okay? So it's a way of internationally knowing that you are at the correct altitude at that point, all right? But then we've also got into that with pressure, and that's really what we're getting into with the hypoxia and decompression sickness. It's the pressure that we're at. So on a normal pressure day, all right, that would be, so again, I'm working on hectopascals, all right, mean sea level would be 1013 hectopascals, all right? So we take off from our drop zone, all right, that happens to be at sea level. 12,000 feet on our altimeter is 12,000 feet pressure altitude, okay? On a high pressure day, that's when skydivers, we tend to all get really excited because we're getting a bit of extra altitude, okay? And the pilot normally tell us we're going to be getting a bit of extra altitude, so everyone gets really excited. We're getting to 12.5 or something like that, so we're getting a bit more time in the air, all right? And then on a low pressure day, that's when you think your DZO is sort of scrimping and scraping on their fuel costs, and we're not getting quite as high, all right? So as an example, this is more with higher altitudes, okay, so looking at, that's our mean sea level. If we go to 18,000 feet, that's half of the pressure that we have at sea level, all right, and then up to the extremes of 40,000 feet, all right, that's 18.5% of the pressure that we had at sea level. So the oxygen's still there, but there's just not as much pressure, making it readily available for our bodies to be able to use. Really quick, I'm not going to go too much into it, okay, but just an example. All right, Earth's atmosphere, we've got 21% oxygen, 78% nitrogen, all right, and that's where, when I go on to the decompression sickness, we're talking more about that, okay? So, human respiratory system, okay, we're all here, we breathe in through our nose and mouth, okay, goes down into our trachea, all right, then into the bronchi, and then into the bronchioles. From there, it then goes to the alveoli. All right, so they're little sacs that we've got in our lungs, and that's where the oxygen transfer takes place, okay? So our deoxygenated blood is oxygenated, all right, and we've got something called hemoglobin that transports that oxygen around our body so our tissues can actually use it. So, what is hypoxia? All right, it's an insufficient oxygen supply available to us, okay, to our body. All right, our body tissues are not going to function correctly, but more so, we're looking at our brain. It's very sensitive to oxygen starvation, okay, and obviously our brain is what's given us the ability to be able to function. All right, so who can get hypoxia? Any of us, okay? Any of us going to normal skydiving altitudes. All right, the factors that will increase our susceptibility to hypoxia. Fatigue, whether that's mental or physical, all right? So thinking now, we're on the drop zone for the day, whether you're an instructor and you're maybe doing tandems, AFF, you're doing a bit of coaching, you want to do fun jumps, whether it's a competitive skydiver who's going up and down, whether even if it's a student, yeah, we're constantly working our brains, working our bodies, all right, the more jumps we do in a day, obviously the more tired we're going to get, both mentally and physically. Exposure to cold, skydiving in the UK, tends to be cold. Don't know who's jumped already this year. I have. Wasn't nice. Okay, physical exertion. So remember I said a lot of what I'm talking about here, yes, I'm trying to refer it to sports skydiving, okay, but my background is military parachuting, and more so I look at it now from a dispatching or an instructor point of view, okay. Our physical exertion was quite high when we're on an aircraft fitting people up with kit, okay, but anyone involved in any kind of parachuting, it is physically exerting, isn't it? Alcohol and its after effects. Obviously, no one jumps here under the influence of alcohol, or maybe the day after when you're a bit hungover. No one does that, of course, but that can increase your susceptibility to getting hypoxia. All right, and then prescription drugs. Obviously, you will, again, clarify or check with your doctors before you take any form of drugs before skydiving. So here is a video that I actually saw last year in Dr. Carter's presentation, and it's the best video I've seen for hypoxia with skydiving. Okay, so as you can see there, it's 21,000 feet and the effects of hypoxia. So you can tell the oxygen masks they've got there, they're not, you know, particularly fitted, probably doesn't have a very good seal on his mask, and this guy is struggling to get a good seal on the mask. But for me, the interesting thing, I sort of looked at this video and I was watching it from the perspective of everyone else here. You know, that guy is showing what we would class as those signs and symptoms of hypoxia, but no one's actually helping him, are they? I mean, skydivers tend to be quite friendly people when we're on board. You know, we like to help each other out. No one's going to see someone having that sort of issue and do nothing about it. So, you know, the aircraft descent goes on. He's obviously got his oxygen mask back on now, and he's had his little nap, and, you know, he's ready to go, isn't he? But this guy in the yellow, he's still, there's still something that he's trying to draw attention to. But again, you know, we're happy to just sort of keep on going at this point. And then in a minute, you're going to see that they're at altitude, doors open, and people are going to start leaving the aircraft. And for me, it's interesting, again, watching the individual that we can see here, but the person that's with them as well. So I sort of looked at this as well from a point of view that the aircraft's into wind, if it's an into-wind release, you know, and green light's on, and, you know, they're moving away from the drop zone at this point. And you think the amount of time that it's taken this individual, he's, you know, we're pretty happy at the minute. We're just scooting away down the bench. We're going to get there. And you know, I hear people laughing. I did the same when I watched it, but because it is funny, but it's really serious, isn't it? That, you know, this actually happens. You know, at this point, we've lost the ability to be able to use our feet, our body, to be able to exit an aircraft. So, you know, let's go for the next best thing. Let's just sort of try and worm our way into the door. Very much like how I exit the aircraft on a tandem, yeah. But, you know, here, and I'm thinking, right, there's going to be a foot in the chest to get them out or something like that at some point. But no, aircraft's still running in, you know. Yes, over a minute. Yeah. So here, yeah, and with this, I struggled to, here, I've tried it a few times, whether it was go or no. But, you know, if you're saying no, you're going to surely try and stop it, aren't you? And then here, you know, this is what unstable exit on a CAT systems jump, isn't it? But they've gone it, and then it's like, oh, okay, I'll go now. Crazy. So when we move into hypoxia, some of the signs and symptoms that you get, hopefully, you know, I'll refer back to this, but I actually refer to myself quite a lot with the examples with hypoxia. So the different types of hypoxia that we can get. Oh, as far as I'm aware, they were fine. Yeah, no, it's you.
Yeah, basically, the guy who went out to the aeroplane woke up on the canopy and didn't remember anything about the rest of the jump. The guy with the yellow arm and the white glove who was waving woke up in the aircraft on the way down because he lost consciousness in the aircraft.
Yeah. So, yeah, different types of hypoxia. Okay, so we've got hypoxic hypoxia. All right, that's when we're not getting enough oxygen, all right, to our brain. It's the most common form of hypoxia in aviation. So as I say, we've got an insufficient oxygen in our environment, so we just can't utilize the oxygen because it's not there. First story I've got, okay, is one of myself. So when I did my AFF, I did it at a drop zone that was 1,500 feet above sea level. And every descent, we always went to 14.5 on my altimeter, which is 16,000 feet pressure altitude, okay? And I was always last out. I was always on the second pass. And just prior to my my AFF, I'd first done my chamber training, so for my hypoxia and decompression sickness. So I knew what my signs and symptoms were of hypoxia. And every single jump, I was hypoxic. Every single jump, I remember saying to my instructor, as I'm sat there, and at first I thought maybe I'm just a bit nervous, you know, it's everything, you know, it's really easy when I go into some of the signs and symptoms to sort of pass them off as something else. But I was hypoxic every single jump, and I'd always say to my instructor, like, you know, can we hurry the aircraft up, you know, because I need to get out of the aircraft. And what I'd kind of figured out from the first couple of jumps was that as soon as I got out of the aircraft, I started feeling better. But also, I mean, not rightly so at all, but also I was like, I've got two people holding on to me. Just like, and, you know, there's a lot of banter in the military. You didn't want to be that guy that failed a jump. You didn't want to be that guy that came down in the aircraft. So I always carried on. But I learned from that, you know, and that's something that I take forward now with my own skydiving, but also with people that I'm jumping with. I'm very mindful of that when I am jumping at drop zones that are slightly higher above sea level and that are still going to 12,000 or higher on the altimeters. So we've also got hypemic hypoxia, okay? So that there is not enough blood. So that could be from severe bleeding, but we don't tend to get that in skydiving, hopefully. But it can also be from carbon monoxide poisoning, okay? So remember I said the oxygen bonds itself to your hemoglobin. That's what transports it around the body. But carbon monoxide bonds itself to the blood over 200 times faster than oxygen does. Okay, so if there's carbon monoxide in the environment, that's going to be what's getting transported around the body rather than what you need, the oxygen. Thanks. So we've got stagnant hypoxia. All right, and with stagnant hypoxia, stagnant is not flowing. So your example of that would be a pilot pulling too much G's. We don't tend to get that in skydiving unless you stay on board and the pilot decides they want a bit of fun once you've got out. I've definitely experienced a bit of that at some drop zones around the world where you've ended up staying on board. But you don't tend to get that with our sort of skydiving. And then histotoxic hypoxia. Okay, so histo is the tissues or cells, toxic is poison. All right, that's where the oxygen is there, but the body isn't able to use it. All right, so this could be from you know, any type of poison, but it's where the phrase "getting high" comes from with drugs and alcohol. Okay, so again, signs and symptoms are quite similar to a lot of the other types. And we'll go into that. Okay, so signs and symptoms, all right? People can react differently to hypoxia, all right? So, you know, I'm going to react differently to Tim from hypoxia, okay? But then some people are always going to get the same symptoms in the same order, and I always do. Okay, so the next slide I go into the different signs and symptoms. So loss of self-criticism, all right? So that could be, you know, you missing checks on board. That could be you just making little mistakes and not really picking up on them. Euphoria, depression, irritability. So we're looking at mood changes there, aren't we? Okay. Dimming, blurring of vision. Okay. I don't ever really see this one coming on, but whenever I've done my hypoxia training, it's the first thing that I notice when I go back on oxygen, that all of the colour has been drained out of my vision. For me, it's always tingling. I go warm in the cheeks first, start tingling, and then I get sort of pins and needles, always in my cheek first, and then I feel like I'm sweating, like now. But yeah, the dimming and blur of a vision is very interesting for me, because I say I never notice it. So I say numbness, tingling sensations, that's what I always get first, okay? But that's not to say everyone's going to get that first, all right? Other people might be really critical people and then might all of a sudden realise that they've lost their self-criticism, okay? Reduction of hearing, I've never noticed that, but I mean, when on a skydiving aircraft, do you really notice that it's loud anyway, isn't it, okay? So it's really easy to, you know, you might experience one of those signs and symptoms, but in the environment that we find ourselves, you just might not notice it. Blueness of lips and then fingernails, pale skin, possibly sweating. All right, and then we're looking at lightheadedness, dizziness, poor coordination, and then semi-consciousness followed by unconsciousness. All right, there's loads of really good videos. There's a video that I wanted to put in this, but it just sort of makes my presentation too long, on the effects of hypoxia in a chamber situation. I've been trying to get back in a chamber because I actually want to do a bit more stuff in a chamber, where I'll go in with a tandem parachute and, you know, someone can read out some of the malfunctions to me and just see how I perform. But with our training that we go through in the military now, they don't put us in the chamber. We sit in a chair with a mask on, and then they just slowly reduce the amount of oxygen, which is good. I don't think it's as good as the chamber. I've always remembered the training that I had the first time that I did it in the chamber. Now I kind of feel like, because I know the signs and symptoms, I'm more aware of them every time I do it. But the first time I did it, I was definitely very aware of what was going on in myself and in other people as well. Okay, so what should we be doing if we notice any kind of those signs and symptoms of hypoxia in ourselves or in other people that we're jumping with? Bring the plane down. Yeah, we've got to let someone know, all right, whether it's the jump master or your instructor or just anyone else that can let the pilot know, and we can get that aircraft down, okay? And that, for me, is one of the biggest things that people don't want to do, okay? Quite often you find, certainly for myself, and it's not just in these sort of situations, as an instructor, it can be hard to say no. But normally the first time you've said no, you find it really easy after that, okay? So for me, you know, if you do see those signs and symptoms in someone else, you know, in yourself, it's maybe a bit easier because you can say, I'm not jumping, or can we get the aircraft down, all right? In someone else, that might be quite intimidating, you know, because that could be the most experienced person on the aircraft, and you're saying, no, we need to bring the aircraft down, okay? But I wouldn't be offended if all of a sudden the aircraft's getting brought down because someone has noticed those signs and symptoms in myself. Obviously, if available, try to administer emergency oxygen, okay? I'm thinking more so along the lines of like big ways at that point, yeah? We don't tend to have emergency oxygen supplies in the aircraft, you know, that you're going to be always thinking about. But certainly, you know, again, you go out to some of the other countries where they're doing a lot of big waves, and they tend to have oxygen in the aircraft all the time. So here is something called the time of useful consciousness, TUC, okay, and it's really applicable to the higher altitudes. All right, so as we look at it here, in the blue we've got normal ascent, and then in the red we've got a rapid decompression. So if you look at 15,000 feet, we've got 30 minutes of time of useful consciousness. Okay, that's not meaning, you know, right, let's push 30 minutes all the time. All right, but that's just making us aware that we've got that amount of time. But then as we start to go that much higher, remember, less pressure, all right, that time massively starts reducing. So this is looking more at those high altitude skydiving operations, okay, which, as I say, it is becoming a commercial business. So 22,000 feet, all right, we're looking more at that rapid decompression. We've got 5 minutes. 25,000 feet, 2 minutes. The first time I went in the chamber, we would go in the chamber on oxygen. We did a pre-breathe, all right, so that purged our body of the nitrogen that we had in it. Went up to 25,000 feet. They did a rapid decompression. We were still on oxygen, kind of just to show us what happens. But then we would take our masks off, and we'd do little tests on a bit of paper. You know, square equals 1 and a circle equals 2. You know, what do you get if you add them together, and draw a shape and that sort of stuff. And that we stayed off oxygen for a maximum of 4 minutes. And then after that 4 minutes, everyone's back on oxygen. Some people would last the whole 4 minutes. Some people would last 30 seconds. And again, there's plenty of videos out there on YouTube of people in hyperbaric chambers where you see them. It's always at the end where the doctor or the technician that's in there is saying, you know, put your mask back on, put your mask back on, put your mask back on, and they're not. And I've always remembered one of the guys that I went in the chamber with, after about 30 seconds, he was just sat there, sort of drooling mess, big smile in his face. And the doctor's like, put your mask back on, put your mask back on, and he, you know, he wasn't going to. So mask went back on, and then all of a sudden, you start noticing all of the things in that person. All of a sudden, they start getting colour back in their face. They look like they're a bit more awake. But that's at 25,000 feet. Then we look more at that 40,000 feet. So for me, I'm probably not going to be paying to go and jump from 40,000 feet. But all of a sudden, it made me start thinking, when you're on a passenger aeroplane, you get that briefing at the start, don't you? You know, if there is a rapid decompression, put your mask on before you put someone else's mask on. Well, actually, if you try and put someone else's mask on, you might not be able to put your mask on. So that was the one thing that I took from that. I was like, okay, not really a skydiving thing, but actually in some sort of emergency situation on an aircraft, yeah, I might put my mask back on first. Whereas I always thought, you know, I've got my kids with me or something like that. No, I'm going to look after them and be super dad, you know, look after them and go around the aircraft and put everyone else's there. I'll get a medal for it, won't I, you know? But no, I'll put my mask on. Okay, so what is decompression sickness, all right? It's the development of nitrogen bubbles in the blood and tissues as a result of atmospheric pressure reducing, all right? So in normal daily life, we breathe in 78% nitrogen, okay? Our body doesn't use it, it stores it, all right? As we ascend, all right, that nitrogen can come out of that sort of, out of the tissues into a solution, all right? If we ascend too quickly, so we're thinking more a rapid decompression or something like that, okay, or we haven't done a pre-breathe, so normally if you're on a high altitude parachute lift, you know, you would pre-breathe 100% oxygen for a time period before the aircraft decompresses, and that's just trying to purge all of the nitrogen out of your body. But if that doesn't happen, all right, there's a chance that nitrogen's going to come out of your tissues into this solution state, okay, and then it forms bubbles. Those bubbles can then lodge themselves in different parts of the body, and then you're going to get different signs and symptoms depending on which part of your body those nitrogen bubbles are in. Who can get DCS? So, big wave skydivers, okay, we're going to high altitude skydivers, again, so yes, I am talking military-wise, but also people that are paying to go and jump from 40,000 feet. And then skydivers who also scuba dive, okay? We shouldn't be scuba dive, or shouldn't be flying that 24 hours after we've been scuba diving. Okay, so the factors increasing our chances of suffering DCS, okay, long exposure to high altitude, rapid decompression of the aircraft, exposure to usual cabin altitude, so we're talking 5,000 to 8,000 feet, all right, too soon after scuba diving, excessive alcohol consumption, all right, prior to a high altitude sortie, and then heavy exercise prior to those high altitude operations, okay, and then for me, coming from a high altitude dispatcher point of view, that's something that we've focused a lot on over the last couple of years, our workload when we are at high altitude, because, you know, if we're lugging kit around, we're moving around quite a lot, that is a lot of exercise, okay, and a lot of the data that we're working on, or were working on, was more a pilot who is sat stationary at those altitudes, and we definitely weren't sat stationary. Okay, so general symptoms that you get from DCS, all right, they could be mild, sometimes they just go unnoticed completely, all right, they can be severe, so you could get pain, vomiting. I'll go into sort of the signs and symptoms more in a bit, and then it could go fatal. So the different types of DCS that we can get, okay, so the bends, skin manifestations, chokes, and then neurological, all right, and what I'll do now, I'll just go through all of those individually. So the bends first, all right, so the bubble location here is in mostly sort of the large joints of the body, all right. Signs and symptoms could be deep pain, all right, and that's going to be aggravated by movement. It can occur at altitude, all right, during the descent, or hours later. So my second story, okay, this one isn't of me, this was of a friend when I was on a high altitude jump from 25,000 feet, and my friend was dispatching me, so they're the person that was basically the jump master, who was thumbing me out the door. And we were jumping from the side door of this aircraft, and we were all up and ready, and about a minute to go, normally the dispatcher is stood up throughout, about a minute to go, he just sat down, and I thought, he's a very experienced dispatcher, and I thought, okay, cool, you know, we're chilled out here. And I went, thought nothing more of it. And then we're talking in the bar later on, and he hadn't really thought too much of it after that. But then I'm talking to him, and I was like, why'd you sit down? He said, oh, I felt like the inside of my kneecap was being tattooed. And he said it was so bad that he just had to sit down and not move. And at that point, he was like, I can't do anything. I just need to sit down. But he kind of forgot about it. And then we sort of started talking about it. And then someone was like, that's probably DCS. You should have probably gone to the chamber for that. And that was the first time that I sort of started realizing that decompression sickness is something that we can get. And I'd always thought high altitude parachuting, hypoxia, hypoxia, hypoxia. Decompression sickness is something you get when you're scuba diving, and I don't scuba dive, so I'm never going to get it. And that was one of the things that made me start thinking a bit more about decompression sickness. And then the people I was jumping with, they then all started looking more into decompression sickness. And then we started looking at our standard operating procedures for what to do if we have an instance where we have decompression sickness on the aircraft. And luckily so, because one of the stories I'll talk about in a minute, actually some of the lessons that we learned off this incident helped to save my best friend's life when he went through an incident. So next one, skin manifestations. Okay, and these are in the skin, obviously, skin manifestations, all right. Signs and symptoms could be itchy skin, all right, sensations of insects crawling all over your skin. You could get, as you can see there, marbled skin or swelling, all right. And this, for me, I've known quite a few people when I've been jumping, certainly doing high altitude parachuting. It's not very comfortable when we've got a lot of kit and our oxygen bottle might be sticking into your body, and you know, you're sort of always comparing bruises and marks on your skin, and I'm thinking, okay, maybe I've had this before, and you are so unaware of some of the signs and symptoms and what they could actually mean for you. So next one, we've got the chokes, where this is in the lungs. All right, and then you could get a burning deep chest pain, all right, obviously made worse every time you breathe, giving you a shortness of breath and a dry and constant cough. For this one, again, I sort of look at the people that I work with, and we've had issues in the past where some of the hoses going from our oxygen mask to the regulator has degraded, and sometimes we start inhaling some of that mask or some of the rubber from inside the hose, and again you start coughing. You're a bit short of breath because you're coughing so much. Normally we'll just change oxygen masks, and you think no more of it. But now, you know, I started learning about this. I was like, okay, I'm now aware of that. So, you know, if I was to see someone coughing, I mean, now if someone coughs, you know, we think the worst, don't we? But to just, you know, I'm more aware of that now. And they're all things that I have seen happen so many times, but they always get passed off as something else. So next we've got neurological, and we're looking at the brain specifically here. Okay, so this is where the bubbles are in the brain, and you could get confusion, memory loss, headache, blurred vision, nauseousness, vomiting, seizures, and possible unconsciousness. Okay, and this leads me on to my next story. Okay, again, jumping at high altitude, all right, again from 25,000 feet, and not me, but my best friend. And on this particular high altitude sortie, we had been above 22,000 feet for about an hour and a half, unpressurized. And this is sort of one of those times where, you know, a few things go wrong and they delay the sortie. But for me as a jumper, it was just long and boring. Took my Rubik's Cube up, did that a few hundred times, and that sort of kept me going. My best friend was dispatching me, and I remember typical skydiver fashion, on the ramp, high five, fist pump, looking him in the eye. You know, I'm thinking, lucky you, you're going to be on the ground soon. We were on a hop and pop, so I was going to be uncomfortable for a bit. But didn't think there was anything wrong with him at all, okay? Little did I know, already at this point, he was going through an absolute ordeal. So by this point, he said that he'd had skin manifestations. He passed it off as changing detergent. You know, we're in a different country, using different laundry detergent, stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, that got worse. And soon after we left, there was an instance with someone else on board that they'd fallen over. So the attention sort of got drawn towards that individual. At this point, my best friend took a knee, and he said it felt like he'd just been shot in his shoulder. So that's where the bubble location was at that point. This is the one that sort of caused him all of the dramas that he was about to have. All the attention was still on the other people or the other person. So at that point, he managed to sort of get himself up and he sat down. And at this point, he said he was just in full zombie mode. He'd sort of lost the ability to be able to communicate what was going wrong with him to everyone else on board. He knew there was something wrong, and in his head, he was saying, you know, how am I going to alert myself or my situation to anyone else? And he just didn't. Kind of followed everyone along. Everyone landed, and he just sort of like walked on into the hangar that they were using. And then he barged past one of the other instructors that was there. And he's a very experienced instructor. And the guy thought it's a bit unusual for him to just barge past me. So he went in to check on him, and by that point, he was unconscious on the floor. So he and another instructor, who really, at this point, they saved his life. They kind of thought, decompression sickness. Basically threw him in the back of a car, got him onto a Marine Corps unit that we were using. And this is where, for me, there's a lot of things that happened on board that extended the time that we were at altitude. So, they're your sort of holes in the cheese that are all lining up. But then there's all these holes in the cheese that actually led to him being saved, in barging past the right person. And then when they got onto the unit, there's 2 medical centres. They got sent to the wrong medical centre. But it turns out the medical centre they went to, one of the doctors there had just done an aviation medicine course. So actually it turned out to be the right medical centre that he got sent to. Because the people on the gate didn't think, skydiving, it's not going to be DCS, so they didn't send them to that medical centre. So he got put on a pressurised aircraft, and he got sent off to a chamber where they got him in there. And in the US, they go on a scale of 1 to 15 of the seriousness of decompression sickness. And they said when he got there, he was at a 13, with obviously 15 being fatal. And then soon after he got there, his pupils dilated. He was later told that, that's when you go up to a 13.5. So very serious at this point. What had happened with him was this nitrogen bubble that had obviously formed in his shoulder had gone into his heart, from his heart up to his brain. Okay, so after this, he made a full recovery, bar losing a lot of brain cells, but he made a full recovery. But he did have to spend 30 days in a traumatic brain injury clinic, and sort of being witness to your best friend who you're used to just being this, normal person that you're used to being around and reacts in a certain way. And he'd say after that, he would just start crying. And a lot of the symptoms that he went through, very similar when I've spoken to people about post-stroke. And some of the of what he went through was very similar to that. So he was very unlucky, but also he was very lucky. And that's where, for me, this was what really spurred me off to try and learn as much as I possibly could about hypoxia and decompression sickness. So, you can keep yourself safe, but also keep others safe as well. So next we've got neurological, and then this bubble location is in the spinal cord or the peripheral nerves. All right, signs and symptoms here is burning, tingling in the lower chest or back. All right, abdominal or chest pain. All right, urinary or rectal incontinence. So if you see anyone on board that has accidentally had that sort of accident, numbness, burning, stinging, and tingling. All right, and then muscle weakness and twitching. So I've gone through all of these signs and symptoms of both hypoxia and decompression sickness, and then I'm going to sort of put them together in a minute, and we can kind of see where a lot of the signs and symptoms are actually very similar. So actions on if you are on board and you suspect yourself or someone else to undergo decompression sickness. So you've got to highlight it as early as possible. And this is where I really learned from a best friend that he didn't highlight it early enough, and he actually lost the ability to be able to highlight it. Okay, so it's really important that you do act as early as possible. All right, you need to reduce the physical activity, get on oxygen if you are not on oxygen. All right, again, we're thinking more high altitude operations here. All right, and then you need to get to a hyperbaric chamber. Okay, this is going to reduce that internal to external pressure differential, and it's going to help the nitrogen to return back to its normal state in the body. Okay, so again, I've got here same but different. So those signs and symptoms of both hypoxia and decompression sickness. So we can see there we've got mood change, but then we've got confusion and or memory loss, problems with your vision, all right, numbness, tingling, lightheadedness, and then headaches. And then obviously on the more extreme scale, that's semi-consciousness and unconsciousness. So for me, it's really important that we understand those signs and symptoms of hypoxia and decompression sickness, okay? But really it's understanding that you can have the same signs and symptoms, but the effects can be so massively different. Hypoxia, obviously we go and get into an oxygen-rich environment and we're going to recover, but that's not going to be the case with decompression sickness. All right, you need to have aware of how you're feeling, okay, and how others are feeling. And for me, again, you know, don't be afraid to say no. Don't be afraid to put your hand up and say to someone else. More thinking, you know, on that sort of hypoxia state for normal skydiving. But if we're looking high altitude skydiving, you know, people are paying a lot of money to go and do that. So to potentially put your hand up and say, no, I'm not feeling right, you know, I need to get medical attention. Or if you see that in someone else, that can be hard. Right, and as I've already said, you need to speak up, okay? If you don't, you might lose that ability to, and then, you know, who knows what's going to happen. Does anyone have any questions for me? Can I give you this? I got told, make sure everyone gets a...
On your slide, the action's on for decompression sickness treatment. You put hyperbaric chamber. Hypo? Are you increasing the pressure around them or decreasing it?
So it's increasing the pressure around them because you've gone from a low pressure environment. You need to go to a higher pressure environment. But also it's the oxygen as well.
Thank you.
Dr. Carroll, correct me there if I am wrong. Yeah. Any other questions?
I'm just interested in people who donate blood and skydiving, because I've had lots of different sort of theories about how quickly you can skydive after giving blood, because surely that's going to affect your ability to go hypoxic.
At that point, I would probably point you to Dr. Carter, who's just walked out of this room. Yeah, because I don't know, and I don't want to give you incorrect information. But yeah, no, I'm not too sure on that. Just jump on him as soon as he gets back in the room. Yeah, go on, Pat.
You looked at the time of useful consciousness following the slide about your actions on. Is there a way of, and like opens the floor for, if you're noticing symptoms in yourself or in others around you, knowing the time of useful consciousness at the height you're at, instead of saying, yeah, descend the aircraft, could you say, we're running, we've got a good 20 minutes, we've got 12 minutes before we're going to have serious effects. Run in, get everyone out, and you're still then, like, is that a safe option between not wasting people's money and then applying logic to what you've explained here?
Yeah, so for me, obviously you've got British Skydiving Ops Manual, you know, that says 30 minutes and then 6 minutes, more so that's 6 minutes above 12,000 feet. But really, do you want to regret it? You know, yeah, it'd be really easy to say, and, you know, and I did it, you know, when I did my AFF, tingling, warmness, it's all right, I'll be all right in a minute, you know, I'll be in an oxygen-rich environment, but, you know, I don't want to be that person that wakes up potentially with a load of twists on my reserve, very, very low at that point, okay? You know, I would rather speak up, and I'd rather take that risk that, you know, if I'm bringing the aircraft down because I've seen it in someone else, that, you know, they're not going to hold it against me. Because, you know, what are the consequences of us bringing an aircraft down? Might have, you know, 15 people that are all a bit annoyed because they've not got to jump. But actually, let's work backwards from that worst case. You've then got to live with that for the rest of your life. If you saw those signs and symptoms in someone else and you didn't do something about it, that's not something I'd be comfortable with. So for me, if I saw those signs and symptoms in someone else, I would not have a problem with saying to the pilot, you need to descend straight away. Can we go back to your question about, Doc, I don't know it, giving blood and then skydiving? So the time, and I'll give you this one.
There's not a short answer to this question. Basically, if you've got a 15-stone, heavily muscled, really fit guy with good blood, they can give blood, and probably within about 48 hours, they'll be able to skydive again safely, because they make up the volume quite quickly, and although their blood won't be quite as thick and have as much oxygen carrying capacity, it'll be almost as good. On the other hand, if you take quite a small person where that unit of blood forms a bigger proportion of their blood, and maybe if they haven't got much muscle, and maybe if they don't have a good diet and they're anemic from that, or they're a woman who has heavy periods and is losing a lot of hemoglobin like that, following blood donation, particularly if they're a repeat donor, they may suddenly have a low hemoglobin, which isn't anywhere near good enough to keep them healthy at altitude. And so the only guidance that we give in the ops manual is that blood donation is incompatible with skydiving. And what you can do is you can ask your doctor to do a blood test a few days after you've given blood to see if your hemoglobin is at a reasonable level. But if you don't want to do that, then you could reasonably just go and do hop and pops for anything between a few weeks and a few months afterwards. But the simplest thing to do is to get a blood test. But it'll be a private charge. The NHS doesn't cover it. Does that answer it reasonably?
Yeah, thank you. So variations then that would be from 48 hours for your muscular guy to a couple of months for somebody at the other end of the spectrum.
There's a huge
Just
range.
throw it.
The problem is it's completely unpredictable. That's the problem. And even some of the big chunky guys occasionally
Is that something? Is that something that's ruled out? You know, when sorry, I'll use it.
You have a mic.
I have a mic. I'll use it. You know, on so on tandem disclaimers, and does it say about blood donation on there that they sign to say they've not recently donated blood, and likewise student medicals?
I can't remember, but I think blood donation is mentioned on there.
Is it? I bet they never read.
That question I'd be able to answer.
Cool. Are there any other questions? If not, thank you very much for your time.